Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 28, 2014. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the forest hadn't noticed. Water still fell from the canopy in fat, irregular drops that struck Chris Brennan's hood with sounds like small judgments. 14 hours. He'd been searching for 14 hours, and the Hoh rainforest had given him nothing but more questions. Chris knelt beside a Douglas fir, its trunk thick as a minivan, and examined the moss. His headlamp cut a circle of white in the gathering dusk. The moss grew wrong here, pressed flat in places, as if something had leaned against the tree recently. But the pattern made no sense. The compression ran vertically, up the trunk, defying gravity and logic in equal measure. He pulled out his field notebook, the pages swollen with moisture despite the waterproof cover, and sketched what he saw. His colleagues at the ranger station had stopped reading his reports 2 years ago. Too detailed, they said. Too theoretical. They wanted facts, coordinates, times, conditions. They didn't want his observations about how the forest behaved, how it seemed to respond to certain stimuli, how disappearances clustered around specific locations during specific lunar phases. Hannah Cortez had disappeared somewhere along this section of the Hoh River Trail. 22 years old, University of Washington graduate student, researching fungal networks in old-growth forests. She'd checked in at the ranger station 36 hours ago, filed her route plan, showed Chris her permits with the careful efficiency of someone who'd done her homework. He remembered her because she'd asked intelligent questions about the Hall of Mosses, about why certain areas seemed to have microclimates that didn't match the broader patterns. "You notice things," she'd said, studying him with dark, analytical eyes. The other rangers just recite the brochure. He'd felt something then, not attraction exactly, but recognition. Another person who saw the world in layers, who understood that surfaces lied. Her parents had called the station at dawn, panicked. Hannah always checked in, always. When she didn't answer her satellite phone, didn't respond to texts, they knew something was wrong. Chris had volunteered to lead the search before anyone could assign it to someone else. The other rangers seemed relieved. Let the weird one handle the weird case. Now, as the October light bled away between the ancient trees, Chris stood and consulted his GPS. The device showed his location clearly: 47.83, 7 degree N, 123.93, 20 degree DW, elevation 578 feet. But the map on the screen didn't match what he saw. The trail should curve east here, following the river. Instead, it ran straight ahead into a section of forest he didn't recognize. He powered the GPS off and on. The same reading, same impossible geography. Chris pulled out his radio. "Station, this is Brennan. I'm approximately 2 miles past the Hall of Mosses turnoff. Checking in." Static answered him. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. Nothing but white noise with a strange rhythm to it, almost like breathing. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no rustling. Even the ever-present drip of water seemed muted. In 15 years of ranger work, Chris had learned to read silence. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of dusk. This was the silence of held breath, of something waiting. He started walking again, following the trail his GPS claimed didn't exist. The moss here grew thicker than anywhere else he'd seen in the park, coating everything in a carpet of green so dense it muffled his footsteps. Sitka spruce and western hemlock towered overhead, their branches knitting together to create a ceiling that blocked what little remained of the day's light. Something caught his eye, a flash of color that didn't belong. He approached carefully, thumb on the button of his flashlight. A backpack hung from a branch 8 feet off the ground, neatly positioned as if someone had placed it there with deliberation. The fabric was soaked through, but Chris recognized the purple and gray pattern. Hannah's pack. He'd watched her hoist it onto her shoulders in the parking lot yesterday morning. Chris documented everything with his camera, taking shots from multiple angles before attempting to retrieve it. The branch was too high to reach. He looked around for something to stand on, and that's when he noticed the trees. They were wrong. Not wrong in any way he could articulate in an incident report, but wrong in the way his scientist's brain processed pattern and deviation. The spacing was too regular. The moss grew in spirals that matched each other too precisely, and the trees themselves. He stepped closer to the nearest one, touched its bark with his gloved hand. The texture felt normal, the moisture level appropriate for the climate. But when he looked at the whole of it, trunk to canopy, his eyes couldn't quite hold the image. The tree seemed to shift, to occupy slightly different positions depending on how he focused. He closed his eyes, counted to 5, opened them. The sensation persisted. Vertigo, he said aloud, his voice swallowed by the moss. Dehydration. 14 hours is too long. But Chris Brennan had a PhD in environmental science he'd never defended because he'd discovered something during his field research that his committee couldn't accept. He documented it meticulously. Areas of wilderness where spatial relationships became fluid, where the rules governing how matter occupied space seemed to soften. His advisor had suggested psychiatric evaluation. His committee had quietly suggested he pursue other interests, so he'd become a ranger instead, and he'd kept documenting. He pulled out his notebook again, began to write. Time, approximately 17:45. Location, coordinates questionable. Observation, spatial distortion consistent with Class 3 anomaly as documented in unpublished research 2009-2011. Hannah's pack positioned above reach, no ladder or climbing evidence. Trees displaying. A voice called out from somewhere ahead. Hello? Is someone there? Chris's head snapped up. The voice was female, young, scared. It could be Hannah. Hannah Cortez, this is Ranger Brennan. I'm here to help you. Oh, thank God. The relief in the voice was palpable. I'm lost. I can't find the trail. Everything looks the same. Chris started forward, moving toward the sound. Keep talking so I can find you. How long have you been out here? I don't know. A few hours. My watch stopped working. He pushed through a curtain of hanging moss, entered a clearing he'd never seen before. The Hoh rainforest didn't have clearings like this. Perfectly circular, ringed by trees that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. In the center stood a woman with her back to him, wearing a rain jacket and jeans. Hannah? She turned, and Chris's mind performed several calculations simultaneously. The woman had Hannah's dark hair, Hannah's height and build, but her face was wrong, not deformed or monstrous, just slightly off, as if seen through water, and her eyes held too much depth like looking into wells that had no bottom. You came looking for me, the woman said, and her voice was Hannah's voice but also other voices, layered beneath it like harmonics. Chris took a step back, hand moving to the radio on his belt. Who are you? We're everyone who got lost here. The woman's face flickered, became someone else's face, a man's, weathered and bearded, then flickered again, a child's face, then Hannah's again. We've been waiting so long. The forest keeps us, do you understand? It keeps us all. The trees around the clearing had started to move, swaying, though no wind blew. Chris's training screamed at him to run, but his scientific mind overrode it. Document, observe, understand. The mining disaster, he said, pieces clicking into place. 1923, the Hoh Valley mining camp. 37 workers killed when the tunnel collapsed during that earthquake. The thing wearing Hannah's face smiled, and the smile contained too many teeth, too many expressions. He remembers. He knows the history. We died in the dark, and the forest took us, made us part of its dreaming. But we want to be whole again. We want to be separate. Where's Hannah? The real Hannah Cortez? She's with us now. She's part of us. You can be too. You understand things the others don't. We've watched you, writing in your little book, seeing what others won't see. Chris's hand found the radio. He pressed the button, didn't speak, just held it down, an emergency signal. The static that responded had voices in it now, dozens of them, speaking over each other in languages he didn't know. The forest is thin here. The entity continued, taking a step toward him. Time doesn't work right. We've been here for 90 years and 90 seconds. We've been here forever. And now you're here, and you're smart enough to help us. Help you do what? Leave. We want to leave. We've been trying for so long, but we're scattered. Fragmented. We need someone living, someone whole, to carry us out. Chris's mind raced through the implications. A collective consciousness, born from violent death, trapped by whatever quantum strangeness affected this area. They weren't evil. They were desperate, confused, lost. I can't do that, he said quietly. You know I can't. The clearing erupted with sound. Dozens of voices screaming, pleading, demanding. The woman's form dissolved into smoke and reformed as different people, cycling through faces so quickly Chris couldn't track them. The trees bent further inward, and the moss began to glow with a faint phosphorescence that had no natural source. Chris ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, his headlamp beam jumping wildly. Behind him, the voices multiplied. Ahead of him, the forest rearranged itself. He'd memorized the trail system, every branch and landmark, but nothing matched his memory. He passed the same fallen log 3 times, approached it from different directions each time. Ahead, he saw a figure. Another Hannah, this one beckoning. To his left, a man in 1920s mining clothes stumbled between the trees. Above, shadows moved through the canopy that weren't cast by anything. His radio crackled. Brennan? Brennan, respond. Johnson's voice, the senior ranger, distant and distorted. We've got your emergency signal. What's your location? Chris grabbed the radio, still running. Johnson, I found evidence of Hannah Cortez, but He looked around, realized he had no idea where he was. The GPS was spinning, the needle rotating continuously. I'm experiencing spatial disorientation, possible environmental contamination, air quality compromised. He had to give them something they'd believe, something that would make sense in an incident report. Copy that. We're organizing a team. Can you make it back to the trailhead? Negative. The forest opened up and Chris stumbled into another clearing. Not the same one, this one was larger, and in its center stood a structure he recognized from historical photographs. The Hoh Valley Mining Camp Administration Building, wooden and weathered, somehow intact despite being abandoned for 90 years. It shouldn't be here. It had been demolished in 1928, the entire camp disassembled. Chris had read the records. Brennan? Johnson's voice was barely audible through the static. Brennan, we're losing you. Chris approached the building slowly. The door hung open, and inside he could see the flicker of lamplight. Not electric. Oil lamps, the kind miners would have used in 1923. He should run. Everything in his training said to retreat, to mark the location, to come back with a team. But Hannah was still missing, and if any part of her consciousness remained separate from the collective entity, time mattered. In quantum terms, observation collapsed probability. If he left now, the waveform might resolve wrong. Chris entered the building. Inside defied geometry. The single-room structure seemed to contain multiple spaces, overlapping like double-exposed photographs. In one overlay, he saw the building as it must have been. Desks, filing cabinets, maps on the walls. In another, the room was filled with people, translucent and flickering, going about work they'd been doing the day they died. In a third overlay, Hannah sat at a desk, writing in a notebook. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes were her own. Chris, oh God, you're real. You're actually real. He moved toward her carefully, watching the overlapping realities shift around him. Hannah, we need to go. Now. I can't. She gestured around the room. I've been trying. Every time I reach the door, I end up back at the desk. They keep showing me things, telling me things. The forest keeps people, Chris. It keeps their patterns, their consciousness. When you die here under the right conditions, you don't go away, you just persist, loop. Chris pulled out his notebook, started writing rapidly. Describe what you experienced, exactly. Timestamps if you can. Are you seriously taking notes right now? I'm documenting. It's what I do. He looked up at her. And I'm thinking, give me data. Hannah managed a shaky laugh. Okay, scientist mode, I can do that. She took a breath, steadied herself. I left the trailhead at 06:30 yesterday. Reached the Hall of Mosses by 08:15. Started taking samples. Around 10 I noticed the moss patterns looked artificial, too regular. I went off trail to investigate, maybe 20 meters. That's when things got weird. The trees started looking like they were in the wrong places. My compass started spinning. I tried to backtrack, but the trail wasn't there anymore. Then what? I wandered. Hours, I think. But my watch stopped and the light never really changed. I kept seeing people, hikers I thought at first. But they'd vanish when I got close. Then I found this building, and they were all here, all those people. They said they died in 1923. They said the earthquake did something to this place, cracked it open, and everything that dies here gets stuck. Chris wrote faster. Did they tell you what they want? To leave. To stop being all mixed together. They said if enough of them could merge with someone living, they could piggyback out, but it would mean... She trailed off, looked at him with frightened eyes. It would mean dying, wouldn't it? Being overwritten. Probably. Chris looked around the room, at the ghostly miners going about their eternal routine. This is a closed time-like curve. Einstein-Rosen bridge, maybe, if we're being generous with theoretical physics. The earthquake didn't just kill them. It trapped their information state in a quantum loop. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense. They're more like recordings playing eternally, but recordings that are conscious, aware. Can you speak English, please? They're stuck in a moment that keeps repeating. The forest isn't haunted, it's glitched. He turned to face the room full of spectral figures. And they know I understand. That's why they let me in. They think I can help them. One of the figures approached, a man in his 50s wearing a supervisor's clothing. His face flickered between present and absent, solid and smoke. You see truly, the man said, his voice layered with others. We've been watching you for years, Ranger Brennan. Every visit to the forest, every observation, every note. You almost understand, you almost see the whole pattern. I see enough to know I can't help you. If I let you merge with me, I'd die. If I try to take you out in any conventional sense, we're talking about extracting quantum information from a closed system. That violates thermodynamics. There's another way. The supervisor gestured, and the room's overlays shifted. Now Chris saw a fourth version, deeper, darker, where the forest itself was visible not as trees and moss, but as a network of connections, energy flowing in patterns that hurt to look at. The forest takes what dies here, but it can also release. If you understand the pattern, if you can see the whole of it, you can open the door. How? You already know. You documented it in your research. The places where space becomes fluid, they're nodes, connection points. If someone who understands the pattern places themselves at the right node at the right time, they can reset the loop, collapse the waveform, in your terms. Chris felt his stomach drop. You're talking about sacrifice, about dying in a specific location to create a counter-pattern. We're talking about choice. The supervisor's form solidified slightly, became almost fully human. We didn't have a choice. The earthquake came, the mind collapsed, and we were trapped in the moment of our dying, stretched out over decades, aware but unable to move forward or back. You have a choice. You can walk away. You can leave this place and file a report that says Hannah Cortez died of exposure, that her body will probably never be found in the wilderness. Chris looked at Hannah. She sat at the desk, tears running down her face, shaking her head. Don't you dare sacrifice yourself for me. I'm already gone, Chris. Whatever they did to me, I'm part of it now. I can feel them in my head, all those voices. Just go. Tell my parents I wasn't scared at the end. Tell them I was doing research I loved. She's lying, the supervisor said. She's still separate, for now. But every hour she stays here, more of her merges with us. By morning, there won't be enough Hannah left to matter. You have until midnight. That's when the pattern resets, when the loop closes. After that, she's ours forever. Chris checked his watch. 19:23. 4.5 hours. His mind worked through the problem with the methodical precision that had earned him a doctorate and then made him unemployable. The entity wanted out. Hannah needed rescue. The forest operated on rules that bent physics but didn't break it entirely. There had to be a solution that didn't involve his death. "Show me the nodes," he said. "Show me the whole pattern." The supervisor smiled, and the room dissolved. Chris found himself standing in the forest, but seeing it differently. The trees glowed with lines of connection, energy flowing between them in precise geometric patterns. He could see the nodes, 7 of them, arranged in a rough circle around the mining camp. Each node pulsed with a different frequency, and together they formed a containment field that trapped information, prevented consciousness from dissipating. "You see," the supervisor said, now just a voice. 7 points. 7 anchors. The earthquake created them when it split the rock beneath this valley. The mine collapse charged them with death, with fear, with the energy of lives ending badly. Now they hold us. If I disrupt the pattern, we go free. All of us. The loop ends. Time moves forward. And Hannah goes free with us, returns to normal space-time, lives. Chris pulled out his GPS, marked the node locations as best he could, translate them back to conventional space. 3 of them were relatively close, within half a mile. The others were scattered across the valley. Hours of hiking apart in normal circumstances. He didn't have hours. "There's something you're not telling me," he said. "What happens to the pattern if I break it wrong? If I disrupt the wrong node first or damage the sequence?" Silence answered him. Then, reluctantly, the pattern collapses inward instead of releasing. Everything trapped here gets compressed, scattered, destroyed, including your Hannah. So I have to do it in the right order, and you're going to tell me that order. We don't know the order. The supervisor's voice held genuine frustration. We're part of the pattern, not above it. We can see it, but we can't read it. That requires someone outside, someone with the knowledge to interpret what they're seeing. Someone like you. Chris studied the pattern, his mind racing through everything he knew about quantum mechanics, about energy systems, about how information persisted in complex structures. The nodes formed a heptagon, irregular but deliberate. Energy flowed between them in a specific sequence. He could see it in the pulse patterns, the way each node lit up fractionally after the one before it. "It's a circuit," he said. "A closed loop. To break it, I need to interrupt the flow at the source, where the energy enters the system." He traced the pattern backward, following the pulses to their origin. "The mine, the actual collapse site, that's the source node." "Yes." The supervisor sounded surprised. "The tunnel entrance, specifically, where the earthquake struck first, where the first men died. That's where the pattern began." "Take me there." The forest shifted around him, and suddenly Chris stood before a hillside scarred with old timber framing. The mine entrance, sealed with rotting boards and warning signs dating back to the 1920s. Through gaps in the boards, he could see darkness that felt deeper than mere absence of light. Hannah appeared beside him, her form more solid now. "Chris, I don't like this. That place feels wrong, worse than anywhere else." "It's the source, the beginning and end of the loop." Chris approached the boards, tested them. They were more substantial than they looked. Not physical wood, but some kind of solidified psychic barrier. "They don't want anyone going in there. The entities, they're scared of this place." "Because going in there could collapse everything," Hannah said. "What if you're wrong about the order? What if disrupting the source node doesn't release the pattern? What if it just destroys it?" Chris turned to look at her. "Then I need more data. Hannah, you said you felt them in your head, all those voices. Can you still hear them?" "Yes, God, yes." They won't shut up. "What are they saying right now?" Hannah closed her eyes, concentrated. "They're arguing. Some of them want you to go in there. They think it's the only way. Others are terrified. They're saying the mine is where they went wrong, where the pattern became permanent. They're saying if you go in there, you might get trapped too. But some think it's the answer. The newer ones, the ones who died more recently. They say the pattern has been weakening over time, that more deaths have made it unstable. They think one more death, the right death in the right place, might overload the circuit, make it collapse outward instead of inward. Chris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. How many deaths? How many people have disappeared in this area? They won't say, but I can feel. Chris, there are more than 37 of them now, a lot more. He checked his watch again. 20:47. 3 hours until midnight. I need to think. Chris pulled out his notebook, started writing equations. Energy in, energy out. Information preserved, information released. Entropy increasing, entropy decreasing. The pattern was a closed system, but closed systems could be opened. You just needed the right catalyst, the right input, or the right observer. Hannah, when you first encountered them, what exactly did they do? Walk me through it step by step. I was taking moss samples. I noticed one section that looked different, more geometric. I got closer and suddenly I heard voices. Not external, internal, in my head. They were asking for help, saying they were lost. I tried to respond, and that's when everything changed. The forest changed. I could see multiple versions of it at once, present day, and how it looked decades ago, and something else, something underneath. You interacted with the pattern, responded to it. That's what triggered your integration. Chris's mind assembled the pieces. It's like quantum observation. By acknowledging them, by trying to communicate, you became entangled with their information state. You're not being held prisoner. You're becoming part of the data structure. Can you speak like a person, please? You're turning into a ghost. Chris looked at her directly, but slowly. The process isn't instant, which means it can be interrupted. If I can separate your information pattern from theirs before midnight, you go back to normal. You become unentangled. And how do you do that? Chris looked at the sealed mine entrance. I go in there, I find the source of the pattern, and I observe it collapsing. That's insane. You said yourself you might get trapped. I might. But I'm betting the pattern needs conscious observation to maintain stability. The entities are trapped because they're part of what they're observing. Infinite loop. But I'm outside the loop. If I can observe the source while simultaneously disrupting it, I might be able to force the waveform to collapse in a specific direction. You're betting your life on quantum mechanics. I'm betting your life on quantum mechanics. Mine was already pretty mediocre. Chris managed a smile. Besides, if I'm wrong, we both get to be dead together. Some people would call that romantic. Some people would call it stupid. They've been calling me stupid for years. I'm used to it. Chris approached the mine entrance, started pulling away boards. They resisted, but eventually came free. The darkness beyond breathed cold air that smelled of earth and something else. Something like copper and fear. Hannah grabbed his arm. Chris, wait, if you do this, if you go in there and it works, what happens to them? All those people who've been trapped here? They get released. Their information pattern disperses back into normal entropy. They stop existing as conscious entities. They die. Really die. They're already dead. This is just ending the echo. Chris pulled out his headlamp, checked the battery. They've been suffering for 90 years, Hannah. Some of them want peace, and the ones who don't get a vote. Reality doesn't run on consensus. Chris stepped into the mine. The darkness was immediate and absolute, swallowing his headlamp beam after just a few feet. The tunnel had partially collapsed, but enough remained for him to move forward, hunched over, one hand on the rough wall. The temperature dropped with each step, and frost formed on the stone beneath his fingers. The voices started almost immediately. Dozens of them layered, speaking over each other. Some pleaded with him to turn back. Others urged him forward. A few just screamed. Chris kept moving, kept documenting in his head since he couldn't write in the dark. Tunnel approximately 7 feet high, 4 feet wide. Supports show signs of earthquake damage. Temperature approximately 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Auditory hallucinations consistent with consciousness field interaction. The tunnel branched. Chris pulled out his compass, watched the needle spin uselessly. The GPS was dead. He was navigating blind, following only intuition and the pull of something he couldn't name. He chose the left branch, kept walking. The voices grew louder, more desperate. He saw lights ahead, not real lights but ghostly illuminations that showed scenes from the past. Miners working, the moment of the earthquake, the ceiling falling, men running, screaming, dying. Chris walked through the visions, refusing to engage. Observation without interaction, the key to maintaining his separation from the pattern. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and here the pattern became visible, not metaphorically, but actually visible. Lines of light networked through the space, connecting rocks, bones, objects. At the center, where the collapse had been worst, a vortex of energy spiraled slowly, drawing everything toward it. The source node. Chris approached carefully, studying the pattern. It was more complex than he'd thought, more beautiful and terrible. Information from dozens of deaths, all compressed and interconnected, forming a structure that was almost alive, almost conscious. "Hello, Christopher." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Not the supervisor, not any single entity. The pattern itself, speaking as a unified consciousness. "You came. We knew you would. You're too curious to resist. I'm here to end this. We know. The question is how. You could destroy us, disrupt the pattern violently, scatter us into entropy. Some of us want that. Some of us have been suffering too long." The vortex pulsed, and Chris saw faces in its light. Dozens, hundreds, cycling through expressions of pain and hope and despair. Or you could join us. Add your information pattern to ours. You're intelligent, aware. You could help us become more than we are. Help us evolve. Into what? Something new. Something that exists between life and death, between moment and eternity. You've always wanted to understand the universe's deeper patterns, Christopher. We could show you everything. Chris felt the pull of it, the seduction of infinite knowledge, of existing beyond normal constraints. He could learn things no living human had ever known. He could solve problems that haunted him. He could be with other minds that understood him. "No," he said quietly. "That's not understanding. That's just being trapped in a different way." "Then what will you do? You can't disrupt the pattern from inside it. You're already entangled. We can feel you, Christopher. Feel your thoughts, your fears, your loneliness. You're one of us now." Chris pulled out his notebook, opened it to the last page he'd written. The equation stared back at him, and he saw the flaw in his reasoning. The pattern was right. He couldn't disrupt it from inside. Observation required distance, objectivity. He'd lost that the moment he entered the mine. But Hannah hadn't. She was still outside, still separate enough to act. Chris pulled out his radio, prayed it would work. "Hannah, can you hear me?" Static answered, then her voice, faint and distorted. "Chris? Where are you?" "In the mine. Listen carefully. I need you to do exactly what I say." He looked at the vortex, calculated trajectories and energy distributions. "There are 7 nodes maintaining this pattern. I'm at the source node now, but I can't collapse it from here. I need you to disrupt the others, break the circuit." "How am I supposed to do that? I don't even know where they are." "You do. You're connected to the pattern now. You can feel them. Close your eyes and reach out with whatever sense they've given you. Find the other nodes." Silence. Then, "Oh God, I can see them. They're like stars in my head. 7 points of light." "Good. Now I need you to go to the closest one. When you get there, you're going to see a place where the energy concentrates. Probably a tree or a rock formation or something that stands out. You're going to observe it collapsing. Not imagine, observe. Watch it happen with absolute certainty that it's happening. Your observation will make it real." "Chris, that's insane." "It's quantum mechanics. Observation collapses probability into actuality. You're entangled with the pattern, which means your observation carries weight. You can force the outcome. He checked his watch. 22:15. You have until midnight. That's when the loop resets. Get to as many nodes as you can. Collapse them. Break the circuit. What about you? I'll collapse this one from inside. But Hannah, the moment you start disrupting the nodes, the entities are going to panic. They're going to try to stop you. They'll show you things, tell you things, try to convince you to stop. Don't listen. Stay focused on the task. I'm scared. Me too. But you're a scientist. You understand observation, measurement, data. Trust your training. Trust yourself. Chris, go. Now. The radio went silent. Chris stood alone in the chamber, facing the vortex. The pattern's consciousness swirled around him, angry now, frightened. You're killing us, it said. All of us. The innocent along with the guilty. The ones who want peace along with the ones who want to live. Is that justice? No, Chris admitted. But it's mercy. You've been suffering for 90 years. It's time to stop. We could stop without dying. We could find another way. Give us time. You've had 90 years. Chris approached the vortex, reached out toward it. His hand passed into the light, and agony shot up his arm. Not physical pain, but the sensation of his consciousness touching something vast and terrible. I'm sorry, I really am. But this ends now. He closed his eyes and observed, not the vortex as it was, but as it could be, dissipating, releasing, letting go. He held that image in his mind with absolute certainty, with every ounce of focus he possessed. This is happening. This is real. The pattern is collapsing. The vortex screamed. Energy erupted through the chamber, and Chris felt his consciousness pulled in multiple directions at once. He existed in the mine and outside it, in the present and the past, alive and dying and something in between. The pattern tried to integrate him, to make him part of its eternal moment, but he held on to his observation, collapsing, releasing, ending. Somewhere outside, Hannah was doing the same. He could feel her, sense her moving between nodes, each one disrupted, sending shockwaves through the pattern. The circuit was breaking. The loop was opening. One more node, just one more. Chris pushed deeper into the vortex, let it envelop him completely. He could see the individual consciousnesses now, the 37 original miners plus dozens more, hikers, campers, researchers, all trapped over the decades. Some fought against the collapse, terrified of the void that waited. Others welcomed it, ready for the end. He observed them all finding peace, observed the pattern releasing them, observed entropy increasing, information dispersing, consciousness returning to the natural order. The vortex collapsed. Reality snapped back like a rubber band, and Chris found himself on his knees in the chamber, gasping for air. The lights were gone. The pattern was gone. Around him lay only rock and darkness and the natural silence of a dead mine. His radio crackled. Chris, I did it. I hit all 7 nodes. They're gone. The forest field, normal. Are you okay? Chris tried to respond, but his voice wouldn't work. Something was wrong. He could feel it, a hollowness inside, an absence where something used to be. The pattern had taken something from him when it collapsed, carved out a piece of his consciousness and scattered it with the rest. He would live, but he wouldn't be entirely himself anymore. Chris, please answer me. He forced his mouth to work. I'm here. I'm coming out. Chris stumbled through the tunnel, following the faint light of the entrance. Dawn was breaking. He'd been in the mine all night, though it had felt like minutes. He emerged into the Hoh rainforest, and everything looked exactly as it should. Normal trees, normal moss, normal October morning light filtering through the canopy. Hannah stood waiting, flanked by a full search team. Johnson was there, and 3 other rangers and 2 paramedics with a stretcher. They rushed forward when they saw him, began checking his vitals, asking questions he only half heard. The woman? He managed to ask Johnson. Hannah Cortez? Right here, Brennan. She walked into the station about an hour ago, said you were in the mine and needed help. We've been looking for you ever since." Chris turned to look at Hannah. She met his eyes, and he saw the truth in them. She remembered everything, but she would never tell anyone because who would believe it? "Did we?" she started to ask, then stopped. "Is it over?" Chris nodded. "It's over. They're gone." Later, after the medical evaluations and debriefings and incident reports, after the search team packed up and returned to the station, Chris found Hannah sitting by the Hoh River, staring at the water. "I can't feel them anymore," she said as he approached. "The voices are gone. It's just me in my head now. It should feel like relief, but mostly it just feels empty." Chris sat beside her. He understood. They were people, trapped and suffering, but still people. We killed them in a sense. We set them free. Maybe it's the same thing. They sat in silence for a while, watching the river flow. Finally, Hannah spoke again. "What happened to you in there? In the mine? You seem different." Chris considered lying, but she deserved the truth. "The pattern took something. I'm not sure what exactly. Some part of my ability to connect, maybe, or to feel certain emotions. I don't know yet. I'll figure it out over time. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was worth it." He pulled out his notebook, looked at the equations and observations he'd written. "I have data now. Proof. Documentation of something no one else has ever properly recorded. I can write it up, publish it. Maybe someone will finally listen. They won't." Hannah's voice was gentle but firm. "You know they won't. It's too far outside acceptable frameworks. Too impossible." "I know." Chris closed the notebook. "But I'll document it anyway, because that's what I do." Hannah stood, brushed off her jeans. "I have to get back to Seattle. My parents are losing their minds, but Chris, thank you for not leaving me there, for believing me when I said I was still separate. You were worth saving." She smiled, started to leave, then turned back. "The forest feels normal now. But do you think it really is? Or did we just close one door while leaving others open?" Chris looked out at the Hoh rainforest, at the ancient trees and endless moss and shadows that moved in ways shadows shouldn't. He thought about the other disappearances, the other mysteries, the other places where reality grew thin. "I think the forest has always been strange," he said finally. "We just exposed one part of it. There are other parts, deeper parts, and someday someone else will find them. Will you keep looking?" "Always." Hannah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then she walked away down the trail, and Chris was alone with the forest and his thoughts and the hollow place where part of him used to be. He pulled out his notebook and began to write. Year, 2014. Location, Hoh River Valley, Olympic National Park. Subject, collective consciousness phenomenon and spatial temporal anomaly. Documentation of a closed time-like curve resulting from seismic event and multiple traumatic deaths, subsequently disrupted through observer intervention. The forest rustled around him, and for just a moment, Chris thought he heard voices in the wind. Not the tortured voices of the trapped, but something else. Something older. Something that had been here long before the miners, long before the forest itself. He looked up at the canopy, at the way light filtered through branches that seemed to exist in multiple places at once, and he understood with terrible clarity that what they'd ended was just one pattern among many. The Hoh rainforest held secrets that went deeper than quantum mechanics or consciousness theory. It held realities that shouldn't exist, spaces between spaces, moments folded into other moments. And now that he'd seen one, he would inevitably see others. Chris closed his notebook and stood. The other rangers would be wondering where he was. He had reports to file, evidence to log, lies to tell that would make his observations palatable to bureaucracy. He would write up Hannah's rescue as exposure and disorientation, his own injuries as a fall in the mine. The truth would go in his personal files, unread and unbelieved. He started down the trail toward the ranger station, and with each step the forest seemed to settle around him, accepting his presence. He'd become something different during that long night. Not entirely human anymore, but not trapped either. He existed in the space between, able to see patterns others couldn't, cursed with knowledge that isolated him. But isolation was familiar. Understanding was what mattered. The Ho River rushed beside the trail, and in its sound Chris heard the echo of all the voices that had cried out for release. They were gone now, scattered into entropy, at peace in oblivion. Only he and Hannah would remember them. Only they would carry the weight of what had been done. It was enough. Chris walked on through the forest, and the forest watched him go. And somewhere in the deep places where reality folded back on itself, new patterns were already forming. New loops, new traps, new mysteries waiting for someone curious enough and foolish enough to investigate. He would find them. He always did. That's what it meant to be the cartographer of lost things, to map the places where the world came undone, and to pay the price for that knowledge. The forest had taken something from him, but it had also given him purpose. In the end, perhaps that was a fair trade. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of what Chris lost in the mine? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee. September 19, 2015. Benjamin Carver had learned to trust the silence. Not the obvious kind, the held breath quiet before a thunderstorm or the muffled hush of fresh snowfall. Those were amateur silences, the ones every hiker and weekend camper recognized. Ben trusted the other kind, the silence that shouldn't exist. The absence of birdsong at noon, the way sound seemed to bend around certain sections of trail, as if the forest itself had decided to stop listening. He'd been stationed at the Klingman's Dome Ranger Post for 11 years, knew every switchback of the 32 miles under his jurisdiction, knew which hemlock groves still held winter's cold in July, which ridgelines caught the thermals that carried voices up from the valleys below, knew too which places felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with topography or weather patterns. The Forney Ridge Trail was one of those places. Ben stood at marker 4-2, adjusting the straps on his pack, when he first saw the family. Standard configuration, harried mother, distracted father, 2 kids. The older boy, maybe 10, was absorbed in a handheld gaming device that definitely wouldn't have reception up here. The younger one, a girl with copper-colored hair pulled into 2 braids, crouched near the trail's edge, arranging pine cones into some pattern only she understood. "Stay where I can see you, Harper," the mother called, not really watching. She was arguing with her husband about whether they'd brought enough water. Ben had seen this scene 1,000 times. Families treating the wilderness like an extension of their suburban backyard. He should have walked over, done his friendly ranger routine, mentioned that the afternoon fog would settle in within the hour, and maybe they should turn back. He started to. Got within 20 feet when Harper looked up at him and smiled. It wasn't a child's smile. Too knowing. Too sad. Then she stood and walked off the trail, into the thick understory of rhododendron and mountain laurel, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she knew exactly where she was going. "Harper!" The mother's scream cut through the afternoon. "Harper!" Ben was already moving, crashing through the undergrowth, radio in hand. "This is Ranger Carver. I have a child off trail at Forney Ridge, marker 4.2. Female, approximately 8 years old, last seen heading northeast into the laurel thicket." His boots found no path through the dense vegetation. Branches whipped his face. He could hear the mother's sobbing behind him, the father's voice rising in panic, but ahead, nothing. No sound of a child pushing through brush, no glimpse of that copper hair. Ben stopped, listened. The silence pressed against his eardrums. He'd been here before. Not physically, though he knew this section of forest, but here, in this moment where the world stopped making sense. 5 years ago. Different trail, different child. Same impossible absence. His hand shook as he keyed the radio again. "Dispatch, I need search and rescue at Forney Ridge. We have a missing child, 8-year-old female named Harper." He realized he didn't know her last name. Last seen at 14:47 hours. Request immediate air support and ground teams. The crackle of static felt like company. Copy that, Ranger Carver. Mobilizing SAR Team Alpha. ETA 45 minutes. Do you have visual on the subject? Ben looked at the wall of green ahead. The fog was starting to roll in, weeks earlier than it should. Through the gray-white tendrils, something moved. Small, child-sized. Negative, he said, but I'm in pursuit. He pushed forward, marking his path with orange surveyor's tape every 30 feet. Standard protocol. The undergrowth thinned after 20 yards, opening into one of those unexpected clearings that dotted the Smokies, spaces where lightning strikes or disease had cleared the canopy decades ago, creating islands of meadow in an ocean of trees. Harper stood in the center, her back to him, still as a photograph. Relief crashed through Ben's chest. Harper, honey, your mom is really worried about you. Let's head back to the trail, okay? She didn't turn around. Harper, I can't find my way home, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant, as if she were speaking from the bottom of a well. I've been looking for so long. Ben approached slowly, hands visible, using his gentle voice, the one he'd practiced after the incident 5 years ago. In therapy sessions he'd stopped attending after 6 months because talking about it made it more real. It's okay. I know the way. I'll take you back to your parents. My parents are looking for me, Harper said. They've been looking for such a long time. Something in Ben's gut twisted. He was close enough now to see that her clothes were wrong. Not the REI brand hiking gear he'd glimpsed on the trail, but older, simpler. A yellow cotton dress with white flowers. No jacket, though the temperature had dropped into the low 50s. Harper, are you cold? She turned around. The face was Harper's. Same copper hair, same dusting of freckles, same gap between her front teeth. But the eyes were different. Ancient and lost, and filled with a longing so profound it seemed to pull at something inside Ben's chest. Do you know the way? She asked. Ben's throat constricted. His radio crackled, dispatch trying to reach him, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from those eyes. Harper, what's your last name? I don't remember anymore. I forgot a lot of things, but I remember I need to go home. She took a step toward him. Can you help me? Please? The fog thickened, curling around them like smoke. Ben could no longer see the edge of the clearing. His GPS unit beeped, low battery, which made no sense. He'd charged it that morning. The compass on his wrist spun lazily, unable to find north. Where? His voice cracked. He tried again. Where is home, Harper? She pointed into the fog. That way. I can almost remember. Sometimes I see it, but when I get close, it disappears. And then I have to start looking all over again. Ben's radio screamed static. Through it, distorted and far away, he heard voices. The SAR team, probably, but they sounded wrong. Too distant, as if they were calling from another world entirely. Ranger Carver, do you copy? We're at marker 4.2. No sign of you or the child. Please respond. He keyed the radio. I'm in a clearing approximately 200 yards northeast of the marker. I have the subject with me. Negative, Ranger Carver. We have eyes on that area. It's empty. Please confirm your position. The fog pressed closer. Harper watched him with those terrible, ancient eyes. Ben looked around. The trees at the clearing's edge had changed. They were hemlocks now, not the oaks and maples that dominated this elevation. And they were dead. Gray skeletons wrapped in kudzu, strangled years ago by the adelgid infestation that had swept through in the early 2000s. But he'd walked through this area last month. The hemlocks here were healthy, treated with insecticide, part of the park's preservation effort. Ranger Carver, respond. We're showing your GPS signal, but it's not moving. Are you mobile? Harper held out her hand. I'm scared of being alone, she whispered. Will you help me find the way? Ben looked at her hand. Small, pale, fingers slightly curled, as if she'd been clutching something for so long she'd forgotten how to let go. 5 years ago, a boy named Marcus, 12 years old, separated from his scout troop on the Appalachian Trail connector. Ben had found him at dusk, standing on the ridge overlooking the Fontana Lake Basin, staring at something in the valley below. Marcus had turned to Ben and said, "Do you see them? They're waiting for me." Ben had reached for the boy's arm. Marcus had stepped backward off the ridge into 200 feet of empty air. By the time the recovery team reached the bottom, they found Marcus's body wedged between two boulders, neck broken, eyes open, and fixed on some distant point no one else could see. The investigation cleared Ben. Tragic accident, disoriented child. But Ben knew better. He'd seen Marcus's face in that last moment. Not fear, recognition, as if he'd finally found what he'd been looking for. Ben had spent 5 years trying to convince himself he'd imagined the shapes in the valley. The figures Marcus had been watching, the way they'd seemed to welcome him. Now, standing in a clearing that shouldn't exist, looking at a child wearing clothes from another decade, Ben understood that he'd been chosen for this. Whatever had taken Marcus had been waiting for him to return. "How long have you been lost, Harper?" he asked softly. She tilted her head, considering. "A long time. Since the fog came. Mommy said to stay close, but I saw something pretty. A bird, I think. Blue. I followed it and then..." She trailed off, confusion crossing her face. "Then I couldn't find the path anymore, and everyone disappeared." "What year is it, Harper?" 1987, she said without hesitation. "July. We came for my birthday. I'm 7 now." Pride in her voice, the way children wear their ages like badges of honor. Ben's hands went numb. "Harper, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The year is 2015. You've been..." The words stuck in his throat. How do you tell a child she's been dead for 28 years? But she was nodding, a terrible understanding dawning in those ancient eyes. "I know," she whispered. "Sometimes I know, but then I forget again. And I keep looking. I can't stop looking." The radio crackled. "Ranger Carver, this is Captain Morrison with SAR Alpha. Your signal is degrading. We're sending a team to your last known position. If you can hear this, stay where you are." Ben looked at the wall of fog surrounding them. "Harper, the other Harper, the one in the yellow dress from today, where is she?" The ghost child smiled sadly. "She followed me, like you're following me now, because I need someone to help me find the way. I can't do it alone anymore. I tried, but I keep getting lost." "You're not lost," Ben said. His voice was steadier than he felt. "You died, Harper. You died 28 years ago, and you need to stop taking people with you." She looked at him with an expression so heartbreaking it made his chest ache. "But I'm scared. It's so dark when I'm alone. And cold. If someone comes with me, maybe we can find the way together. Maybe if there are enough of us, we won't be scared anymore." Ben thought of Marcus. Thought of the 6 other disappearances in this section of the park over the past 3 decades. The ones that had never been solved, bodies never recovered. Hikers who'd simply vanished into the fog and never came back. "How many?" he asked. "I don't remember their names anymore. But they're waiting. They're all waiting for me to find the way so they can go home too." The fog began to thin. Through it, Ben saw shapes, figures standing at the clearing's edge. A teenager in 1990s flannel, an elderly man in vintage camping gear, a young woman in running clothes, and there, copper hair in 2 braids, yellow dress, today's Harper, standing hand in hand with her ghost. They were all watching him, waiting. Ben's radio crackled one more time. "Ranger Carver, we have a situation. The missing child, Harper Reeves, her mother is saying she saw her daughter disappear with a ranger. A male ranger fitting your description. She's claiming you took Harper into the woods. Please respond immediately." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. To the family on the trail, he hadn't been pursuing their daughter. He'd been leading her away. And now, in this place between worlds, he understood. Harper, the ghost, didn't appear to her victims. She appeared as them, a mirror, a lure, drawing in anyone who tried to help. And Ben had done exactly what she needed. Followed, pursued, crossed whatever threshold separated the living world from this gray space where the lost ones gathered. "I can help you," Ben said slowly. The figures at the clearing's edge leaned forward, hopeful. "But not by following you deeper." Young Harper shook her head frantically. "No, you have to come. You have to help me find—" "The way isn't forward," Ben interrupted. "It's back. Back to where you started. Back to the last moment before you stepped off the trail." "I tried going back," Harper said, her voice rising to a childish wail. "But I can't find it. Everything looks the same. The trees and the fog and the paths that go nowhere. Because you're not looking for the right thing." Ben dropped to one knee, bringing himself to her eye level. Behind him, he could hear sounds from the real world. Helicopter rotors, voices calling his name, the organized chaos of a search operation. "Harper, what did your mother look like?" The ghost child blinked. I don't..." "Try, please. What color were her eyes?" "I don't remember." "Her voice. What did it sound like when she called your name?" Harper's face crumpled. "I can't. It's been too long, I forgot." "Then remember this." Ben pulled out his phone. No signal, but the photos still worked. He scrolled to the image he'd taken an hour ago. Harper Reeves alive, crouching on the trail, arranging pine cones. He held it out. "This is Harper, 8 years old. Her mother's name is Christine. Her father is David. She has a brother named Tyler who ignores her because he's at that age where little sisters are embarrassing. She's real, Harper. She's alive. And she's not supposed to be here." The ghost child stared at the photo. Her face, both faces, the 7-year-old and the current victim, flickered like bad reception. "You're not helping her by keeping her," Ben continued. "You're stealing her life, taking her from everyone who loves her. Is that what you want? To do to someone else what was done to you?" "I'm just so lonely," Harper whispered, and for the first time she sounded like what she truly was. A terrified child who'd been lost in the dark for longer than most people lived. Ben's radio crackled. Through the static he heard, "Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in grid 7 Delta, moving in." The fog was thinning faster now. The figures at the clearing's edge were fading, their features becoming indistinct. But Harper, both Harpers, remained solid. "I know you're lonely," Ben said gently. "I know you're scared. But Harper, the real way home isn't here. It never was. You need to stop looking and start letting go." "I don't know how," she sobbed. Ben extended his hand, not to take hers, but open, offering a choice. "The people who love you, Harper Calloway." The name came to him from nowhere, or from everywhere, from the forest itself. "They never stopped looking. Your parents, your grandparents, they searched for you until they died. They're waiting for you, but not here, not in the fog, not in the in-between." Young Harper's eyes widened. "Calloway," she repeated. That's my name. Harper Elizabeth Calloway." "Yes. I'm from Asheville. Mommy teaches piano. Daddy works at the plant. I have a dog named Biscuit." The memories were coming faster now, color returning to her translucent face. I remember the bird. It wasn't blue. It was a butterfly, a swallowtail. I followed it off the trail, just for a second, but the fog came and I couldn't find my way back." "You can now," Ben said, "if you let go, if you stop holding on to the others." Harper looked at the figures around the clearing. They were almost invisible now, but Ben could feel their presence, their hope, their desperate wish to finally be found. "Will it hurt?" Harper asked. "I don't know," Ben admitted. "But it has to be better than being lost forever." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real child's smile this time, innocent and trusting. Okay. She closed her eyes. The fog lifted like a curtain. Ben was kneeling in an empty clearing, not the one he'd been in moments before, but a real place, identifiable on his map. Grid 7 Delta, 300 yards from Forney Ridge Trail. His GPS signal jumped to life, showing his exact coordinates. The compass on his wrist pointed steadily north, and 10 feet away, curled up against the base of an oak tree, was Harper Reeves. The real one. Alive. She blinked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "I had the strangest dream," she murmured. "There was another girl. She looked like me. She said she'd show me something pretty if I followed her." Ben gathered the child in his arms as the SR team burst through the tree line. They were shouting coordinates, calling for medics, but all Ben could hear was Harper's steady breathing against his chest. Alive. Warm. Real. "Ranger Carver." Captain Morrison stopped short, staring. "How the hell? Your signal was degraded, we thought." "I found her," Ben said simply. Later, after Harper was reunited with her sobbing parents, after the incident reports were filed and the medical examinations completed, mild dehydration, minor scratches, no serious injuries, Ben sat alone in his office at the ranger station. The sun had set hours ago. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. His computer screen glowed with search results. It hadn't been hard to find. Harper Elizabeth Calloway, age 7, disappeared July 12, 1987, during a family camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Extensive search conducted. Body never recovered. Case remained open for 15 years before being officially closed. He scrolled down to the family photos. Harper Calloway smiled out from the screen, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, wearing a yellow dress with white flowers. Behind her, a woman who looked tired but proud. A man with kind eyes, a golden retriever. The obituary for Harper's mother, dated 2008, mentioned that she'd been predeceased by her beloved daughter Harper, who passed away in 1987. They are reunited at last. Ben closed the browser window. His radio crackled. "Carver, you still there?" "Yeah, Morrison." "What's up?" "Just wanted to say good work today. The Reeves family is beyond grateful. The mother specifically asked me to thank you. She said when Harper woke up, she told them that a ranger and another little girl helped her find her way back." Ben's throat tightened. "Just doing my job." "Well, you did it damn well. Get some rest. You've earned it." The radio clicked off. Ben stood and walked to the window. The fog was rolling in across the ridgeline, thick and white and impenetrable. Somewhere in those mountains, trails wound through ancient forests, and somewhere he hoped Harper Elizabeth Calloway had finally found her way home. He thought about the others, the figures he'd seen in the clearing, the ones Harper had been collecting, trying to build herself a family in the fog. He wondered if they'd been released too, or if they were still out there waiting. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd request the files on the other disappearances, cross-reference dates and locations, see if there were patterns. Because whatever had happened today, whatever impossible thing he'd witnessed, it meant one thing. The forest held more than trees and stone. It held the lost, the forgotten, and maybe, with enough time and patience, some of them could still be found. Ben pulled his jacket from the chair and headed for the door. Outside, the night air smelled like pine and coming rain. He took a breath, held it, released it slowly. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Another answered. The silence between them felt like peace. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more immersive stories that explore the boundaries between our world and what lies beyond. What's your interpretation of what Ben truly experienced in that clearing? Was Harper Calloway's spirit real, or was it something else entirely, drawing lost souls together? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. Olympic National Park, Washington, October 2009. The phone rang at 3:47 p.m., and David Chen knew before answering that someone was about to ruin his life again. He'd been filling out incident reports in the ranger station, The kind of mundane paperwork that made up 90% of the job. Bear-proofing violations, illegal campfires, tourists who thought flip-flops were appropriate footwear for wilderness trails. The autumn light slanted through the windows at that particular angle that always made him think of endings. Outside, the Hoh rainforest pressed against the building like something alive. 200 inches of annual rainfall condensed into moss and fern and the kind of green that existed nowhere else on Earth. Olympic National Park, Ranger Chen speaking. The woman's voice came through fractured, a mother trying to hold herself together with both hands. My daughter, please, they said you're the closest. Olivia Martinez, she's 16, they lost her, the school group. She's been gone 8 hours. David's pen stopped moving. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he lifted it anyway, buying himself 3 seconds to push down the thing that always woke up when someone said lost in that particular tone. Ma'am, I need you to slow down. Where exactly? Hoh Rainforest Trail. The school Lincoln High from Seattle, they're doing some wilderness education week. The chaperone said she was there 1 minute and then the woman's voice cracked. It's getting dark soon. It's supposed to drop to 42 degrees tonight. She's just wearing a fleece jacket. David was already reaching for his radio, his go bag, the keys to the truck. 15 years wearing the badge had made the motions automatic. I'm 20 minutes out. Have they established a search perimeter? The teacher and 2 other adults are still looking, but they're just parents, they don't know. Tell them to stay on the main trail. Tell them not to go deeper. He was out the door now, boots hitting gravel. The October air smelled like cedar rot and coming rain. I'm mobilizing a full search team. What was she wearing besides the fleece? Blue, royal blue fleece, jeans, pink sneakers. God, pink sneakers. I told her to bring hiking boots, but she said they weren't cool enough. The mother dissolved into something between a sob and a laugh. David started the truck, threw it into gear. The engine's rumble filled the cabin, a sound that usually meant purpose, action, control. We'll find her, Mrs. Martinez. I've done hundreds of these searches. He didn't tell her that he'd lost count of how many ended with a body bag. He definitely didn't tell her about the last time someone went missing in the Hoh, 3 years and 4 months ago. About the ranger named Marcus Webb, who'd volunteered to sweep the northern quadrant and never came back. About the search that had stretched into 6 days before they'd found Marcus's radio, his flashlight, his boots arranged in a neat line on a nurse log like someone had stepped out of them and kept walking barefoot into the trees. They'd never found the rest of him. David pushed the truck harder than he should have on the narrow park roads, taking curves at speeds that would have earned a citation from any other ranger. The forest blurred past. Douglas fir, western hemlock, Sitka spruce rising like cathedral columns into the perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. In 2009, his GPS was a clunky Garmin unit velcroed to the dashboard, the satellite signal spotty at best under this much vegetation. He navigated by memory, by the feel of roads he'd driven 1,000 times. His radio crackled. Chen, this is dispatch. We've got your location. Taylor and Rodriguez are 40 minutes behind you. Fish and Wildlife is sending their chopper, but with the cloud cover. Copy that. I'm not waiting. He switched frequencies, tried to raise the school group. This is Park Ranger Chen. I'm inbound to your location. Can anyone hear me? Static. Then a man's voice, breathy with panic, poorly controlled. Yes, we're here. We split up to cover more ground, but I think that was wrong. We can't stop. Everyone stops moving right now. David kept his voice level, authoritative. Panic was contagious in the wilderness. How many people in your group total? 15 students, 3 adults. But 2 of the adults are deeper in. They went after. Call them back. Now. Give me your exact location. We're on the Hoh River Trail, maybe 2 miles in from the visitor center. Near those big maples with there's a sign about Roosevelt elk? David knew the spot. Mile marker 2.3, where the trail forked toward the Mount Tom Creek loop. Terrain that looked easy and wasn't. The forest there grew dense enough that you could step 15 feet off the trail and become completely disoriented, the canopy so thick that even at noon it felt like dusk. And Olivia Martinez had been gone for 8 hours. He reached the trailhead in 18 minutes, parked diagonally across 2 spaces, and hit the trail at a pace just short of a run. His pack held everything he'd need for a 48-hour search: GPS transponder, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, protein bars that tasted like compressed cardboard, rope, flares, the yellow emergency blanket that always made him think of crime scenes. And the pistol, a Glock 22 he'd qualified with every year, and fired exactly once outside the range 3 years ago, at shadows between the trees that had looked like a man, but moved wrong. The Hoh Rainforest Trail was one of the park's showcases, a gentle path through what the brochures called a primeval wonderland. Tourist families walked it in sneakers, taking photos of the massive big-leaf maples dripping with club moss, the nurse logs erupting with ferns, the diffuse green light that made everything look like it existed underwater. David had given 100 interpretive walks here, pointing out Roosevelt elk scat, explaining how the Sitka spruce could live 500 years, watching children's faces light up when he told them the forest was older than the United States. What he never told them was how the forest felt after dark, how the rain absorbed sound until your own footsteps seemed to come from somewhere else, how the shapes in the fog could look like people until you got close enough to realize they were just peculiar arrangements of branch and shadow, how sometimes you'd hear voices in the distance, calling your name in the voices of people you knew, and if you were smart, you'd ignore them completely. He found the school group at mile marker 2. 3, exactly where they'd said. 14 teenagers and 1 adult clustered on the trail like refugees, all of them wearing the slightly shell-shocked expression of people who just learned that nature didn't care about their field trip itinerary. The adult, a man in his 40s wearing a fleece vest that said Lincoln High School Parent Volunteer, stepped forward with the desperate relief of someone passing a terrible burden. "Thank God. Are you the ranger? We're not equipped for this. We thought it was just a nature walk." Everyone accounted for except Olivia Martinez? David's eyes swept the group, doing the math. 14 plus 1 meant 2 adults were still out there. "Where are your other chaperones?" Mrs. Hendricks went south toward the river. Mr. Patterson went north toward the creek junction. That was 40 minutes ago. They're not answering their radios. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. The afternoon light was already failing, filtered through clouds that promised rain before nightfall. Temperature was 56 degrees now, would hit the low 40s by midnight. A 16-year-old in a fleece jacket could survive that if she stayed dry and found shelter, but only if she didn't panic, didn't exhaust herself wandering in circles, didn't make any of the 100 mistakes that turned a lost hiker into a corpse. "I need you to take all these students back to the trailhead right now," David said. "There's a ranger station. We can't just leave her out here." "You're not. I am a search and rescue certified wilderness ranger. This is my job." He pulled out his radio. "I'm calling in a full team, but right now you're a liability. Get these kids somewhere warm and safe." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but something in David's tone made him nod instead. David watched them file back up the trail, the teenagers glancing over their shoulders at the darkening forest like they expected something to follow. When they were gone, the silence settled in like sediment. David stood at the trail junction, studying the ground with the systematic attention of someone who'd done this too many times. Boot prints everywhere, dozens of them, overlapping and confused. The school group had trampled any useful tracks. But there, 15 feet off the trail where the salal bushes grew waist-high, a broken branch at approximately chest height for a teenage girl. Fresh break, the wood inside still green. He pushed into the undergrowth. The forest swallowed him immediately. That was the thing people didn't understand about the Hoh. It wasn't just dense vegetation, it was density that had accumulated over centuries, layers upon layers of growth and rot until the whole thing became almost geological. Nurse logs wider than coffins spawned entire ecosystems on their backs. Devil's Club grew in thickets that would shred exposed skin. The ground was less ground than a spongy mat of moss and decay that could be 6 inches deep or 6 feet. And everywhere, the sound of water. Not dramatic waterfalls or rushing rivers, just the constant drip and trickle of moisture moving through the system. It made other sounds hard to place. Was that a footstep or a branch releasing its burden of condensation? Was that breathing or just the forest exhaling? David's radio crackled. "Chen, this is dispatch. What's your status?" 1 mile northeast of the visitor center, following possible trail markers. Subject is a 16-year-old female, 8 hours missing, inadequately dressed for overnight exposure. He kept his voice professional, detached, the way Marcus had sounded on his last radio check. "Just gonna sweep the north quadrant, be back before dark. I've got 2 missing chaperones as well, requesting you ping their cell locations." "Copy that. Cell coverage is spotty in your area, but we'll try." Spotty was generous. In 2009, before smartphones became ubiquitous, before every teenager had a device that could pinpoint their location within 3 feet, you could vanish in Olympic National Park and stay vanished. The forest was 1,442 square miles of terrain that ranged from temperate rainforest to alpine tundra to glacier-carved peaks. People walked off trails and were never seen again. Not frequently, the park averaged 2 or 3 disappearances per year, but regularly enough that every ranger had stories. David had more stories than most. He found the first piece of evidence 30 yards deeper, a scuff mark on a nurse log, recent enough that the moss was still bright green where it had torn. Someone had climbed over this obstacle, probably in a hurry. He scanned ahead with his flashlight, though the afternoon still held enough light to make it barely necessary. "Olivia!" His voice sounded flat, absorbed by the vegetation before it could travel far. "Olivia Martinez, this is Park Ranger Chen. If you can hear me, stay where you are and keep making noise." Nothing. Just the drip of water, the whisper of wind through the canopy hundreds of feet overhead. He pushed forward, marking his route with orange flagging tape tied to branches every 50 feet. Search and Rescue 101. Don't become a victim yourself. Always maintain awareness of your position, your egress route, your... David stopped. Ahead, perhaps 20 yards through the undergrowth, he could see a shape. Human-sized, standing motionless between 2 Sitka spruce trees. His heart rate spiked before his brain could catch up. "Hello?" He brought his flashlight up, played the beam across the figure. "Olivia? Mrs. Hendricks?" The shape didn't move. Didn't respond. David's hand went to his radio, then stopped. He was being ridiculous. It was probably just a peculiar arrangement of branches, the kind of pattern recognition glitch that made people see faces in clouds. He'd seen it 100 times. The forest was full of shapes that looked almost human until you got close enough to realize. The shape moved, just a slight shift, barely perceptible. But David had spent 15 years in these woods, and he knew the difference between a branch swaying in the wind and something with intent. "Identify yourself." His voice came out harder than he'd intended, carrying the authority of badge and jurisdiction. His right hand drifted to his hip, not quite touching the pistol, but close enough. "This is a restricted area. I need you to respond immediately." The shape remained still. In the failing light, David couldn't make out details. Just a silhouette, roughly 6 feet tall, standing in that peculiar motionless way that humans didn't naturally stand. Too balanced, too patient. He started forward, picking his way through the undergrowth, keeping his flashlight trained on the figure. 20 yards became 15. 15 became 10. The shape was wearing clothes. He could see that now. Dark jacket, jeans maybe. But something about the proportions seemed wrong. The head slightly too large, the arms hanging a bit too long. "I'm a park ranger," David called. "Are you injured? Do you need assistance?" 5 yards now, close enough to smell the rot of vegetation, the wet cedar, the... something else. Something underneath the forest smells. Sweet and wrong, like fruit left too long in the sun. David's flashlight beam finally hit the figure directly. It was Mrs. Hendricks. He could see the name tag on her volunteer vest, could see her face, could see her mouth hanging open like she'd been in the middle of saying something when she'd stopped being entirely herself. Her eyes were wrong. Not injured, not ill. Just wrong in a way David's brain struggled to process. The pupils too dilated, the gaze fixed on nothing, the skin around them slightly gray like old meat. She stood with her arms at her sides, swaying slightly, and when she finally moved, it was to turn her head toward him with mechanical precision. "David." Her voice was flat, affectless. David Chen. He hadn't told her his name. "Ma'am, are you all right?" He kept his distance, every nerve screaming at him to back away, but his training holding him in place. Medical emergency. Could be a stroke, could be drugs, could be any number of explanations that didn't require. "We've been looking for you, David." Mrs. Hendricks smiled, but it was wrong. All teeth and no warmth. "Marcus said you'd come." The world tilted sideways. David's hand found his radio without conscious thought. "Dispatch, this is Chen. I need immediate medical evacuation. I've found one of the missing chaperones. She's..." He paused, searching for words that would make sense. "She's exhibiting signs of severe neurological distress, possible stroke or toxin exposure." "Copy that. Can you walk her out?" David looked at Mrs. Hendricks. She hadn't moved again, hadn't blinked, just stood there swaying slightly like kelp in a current. Her smile remained fixed. "Marcus wants to see you," she said in that flat voice. "He's been waiting. 3 years and 4 months. He's very patient. Negative on walking her out," David said into the radio, proud that his voice stayed level. "Subject is non-responsive and possibly combative. I need that evac now." He took a step backward, hand definitely on his pistol now, though he couldn't imagine what he'd be shooting at. The woman was clearly in medical crisis, probably suffering from exposure-induced dementia or... Mrs. Hendricks lurched forward with sudden horrible speed. David backpedaled, catching his boot heel on a root going down hard on the mossy ground. His flashlight skittered away. Mrs. Hendricks loomed over him, her face now inches from his, and he could smell it clearly now, that sweet rot smell, like something had died and been left to ferment. "He's in the deep parts," she whispered, "where the green grows thick, where the light never reaches. He's been feeding, David, getting stronger, and he wants to show you what he learned." Then she collapsed, just folded at the joints like a puppet with cut strings, landing in a heap on top of him. David shoved her aside with more force than necessary, scrambling backward until his spine hit a tree trunk. His breath came in sharp gasps. His radio had fallen somewhere in the moss. For 30 seconds he just sat there, listening to his heart hammer against his ribs, watching Mrs. Hendricks's motionless form. She was breathing. He could see her chest rising and falling, slow and regular. But she didn't move otherwise, didn't speak, might as well have been unconscious. David found his flashlight, found his radio, reported the situation in the clipped professional tone that meant he was barely holding it together. Then he checked Mrs. Hendricks's vital signs with shaking hands, pulse strong and steady, respiration normal, no signs of trauma, no track marks, pupils equal and responsive now. She opened her eyes. "What?" Her voice was her own again, confused and frightened. "What happened? Where's Olivia?" "Ma'am, you were..." David stopped. What could he say? You were possessed? You spoke with the voice of a dead ranger? You collapsed. Do you remember anything? "I was looking for the girl and then..." She sat up, wincing. "I heard something, like someone calling my name. I thought maybe it was Olivia, so I followed the voice and then... nothing. It's just blank." David helped her to her feet, guided her back toward the main trail. His hands were steady now, his training reasserting itself over the animal panic. Medical crisis. Possibly a seizure or temporal lobe event. Nothing supernatural about it. The brain could do strange things under stress and exhaustion. The brain could make you hallucinate, could make you say things you didn't remember, could... Marcus said you'd come. No, not going there. Not thinking about it. Marcus was dead, probably killed by a bear or succumbing to exposure, and his body was somewhere in these woods becoming part of the food chain. What had happened to Mrs. Hendricks was a medical event, nothing more. By the time he got her back to the main trail, full darkness had fallen and the rain had started. Just a mist at first, then a steady drizzle that hissed through the canopy. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Somewhere out there, Olivia Martinez was cold and scared and running out of time. And somewhere out there, Mr. Patterson was still missing. David's backup arrived in the form of Rangers Taylor and Rodriguez, both younger than him, both good at their jobs, both carrying the kind of optimism that came from never having lost someone. They took Mrs. Hendricks back to the station while David pushed deeper into the forest, his headlamp carving a white tunnel through the darkness. The rain intensified. Water ran down his face, soaked through his jacket despite the Gore-Tex, turned the forest floor into a treacherous mess of hidden roots and slick moss. He'd been searching for 3 hours now, had covered nearly 4 miles in a rough grid pattern, and had found nothing except trees and more trees and the kind of darkness that made you understand why ancient humans feared the forest. His radio crackled. "Chen, Rodriguez here. The woman, Mrs. Hendricks. She's saying some weird things. Keeps talking about voices in the forest about something feeding. Medical thinks it might be carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camping stove." David didn't respond immediately. Carbon monoxide poisoning could cause hallucinations, could cause neurological symptoms. It made sense. It was a rational explanation. So why did the hair on the back of his neck refuse to lie flat? Copy that. Have they located Patterson? Negative. His cell phone last pinged near the Mount Tom Creek Junction about 2 hours ago, but nothing since. The Creek Junction. David consulted his GPS. He was approximately 3/4 of a mile from that location. He adjusted his course, pushing through Devil's Club that tore at his sleeves, stepping over nurse logs that could have been there since before the Mayflower. The forest at night was a different country. His headlamp created a small sphere of visibility, maybe 15 feet in radius, beyond which existed only suggestion and shadow. Shapes moved in his peripheral vision, branches swaying, water dripping, small animals fleeing from the light. He told himself that's all they were. He told himself he wasn't hearing footsteps matching his own rhythm, stopping when he stopped. He told himself the voice calling his name was just the wind through the trees, just the rain hitting leaves, just anything except a dead man's voice. "David." He spun, bringing his flashlight up. Nothing. Just trees dripping with moisture, ferns bent under the weight of water, darkness pressing in like something with mass. David Chen. Closer now. Behind him. To his left. The rain made directionality meaningless. He keyed his radio with numb fingers. "Dispatch Chen. Are Taylor and Rodriguez on the grid near my position?" "Negative. They're still at base camp with the evacuee. You're solo in that quadrant." "Copy." He didn't ask about the voice. Didn't want to be the ranger who reported hearing things in the forest. That's how you got pulled off search duty. Got assigned to desk work. Got looked at sideways in the break room. That's how Marcus had been in his last few weeks, actually. Quiet and withdrawn. Jumping at sounds no one else heard. Claiming he felt watched when he worked the northern sectors. David had attributed it to stress. Maybe PTSD from a bad rescue the previous year. He'd suggested Marcus take some time off. Maybe talk to the park psychologist. Marcus had gone missing 3 days later. David found the Creek Junction at 9:47 p.m., his boots squelching through mud, his breath visible in the beam of his headlamp. The temperature was 38 degrees and falling. Olivia Martinez had now been missing for 14 hours. The statistics were brutal after 24. Survival rates dropped by half, then half again every day after that. The junction was where the main trail split, one fork following Mount Tom Creek upstream toward the higher elevations, the other curving back toward the Hoh River. The signpost stood at an angle, its paint weathered to illegibility, pointing at 2 different versions of "not here." Mr. Patterson's radio lay on the ground next to the signpost, still turned on, battery indicator showing half charge. David picked it up carefully as if it might bite. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just a radio, placed, not dropped, placed, on the muddy ground like Patterson had set it down to tie his boots and then forgotten about it. "Dispatch, I found Patterson's radio at the Creek Junction, no sign of Patterson himself." "Copy. We're organizing a larger search grid for first light. Can you maintain your position until..." The voice cut through everything, clear as crystal despite the rain. "Help, please, someone help me." Female, young, scared, Olivia. David was moving before conscious thought caught up, crashing through the undergrowth toward the voice. His headlamp beam bounced wildly, showing snapshots. A massive Douglas fir, a boulder dripping with moss, a gap between the trees that might have been a game trail or might have been nothing. "Olivia, keep talking, I'm coming to you." "I'm stuck. I fell and I think my ankle's broken, please hurry." The voice came from ahead and below. David realized he was on a slope, the ground falling away steeper than it looked. He grabbed a small hemlock for support, tested his footing before committing his weight. "Keep making noise so I can find you." "Here, I'm right here, please, it's so cold." He could see her now, or at least a shape that could have been a person, huddled at the base of the slope maybe 40 feet below him. Royal blue fleece, just like Mrs. Martinez had described. Pink sneakers. He felt a surge of relief so powerful it made him dizzy. "Olivia, my name is David. I'm a park ranger. Stay exactly where you are. I'm coming down." He started picking his way down the slope, using tree roots as handholds, trying to balance speed against the very real danger of joining Olivia in her injury. The rain had made everything treacherous. His boot slipped twice, saved only by his grip on vegetation that could have easily pulled free from the shallow soil. 20 feet from her now. He could make out more details. Dark hair plastered to her head by rain, arms wrapped around her knees, shivering violently. "You're doing great, Olivia. Your mom's going to be so happy to hear you're okay." 10 feet. "Did she send you?" The girl's voice was strange, flat. "Yes, she's very worried. Lots of people are looking for you." 5 feet. David's headlamp illuminated Olivia's face fully, and every muscle in his body locked. It wasn't Olivia Martinez. It was Marcus Webb. No, it was wearing Marcus's face, but wrong. Like a mask pulled too tight, the features slightly distorted. It smiled at him with Marcus's smile, except Marcus had never smiled like that, cold and hungry and ancient. "Hello, David," it said in Marcus's voice. "I've missed you." David tried to back up, but his boots slipped on the wet slope. He went down hard, sliding, grabbing for purchase and finding only loose vegetation. He tumbled the last few feet, landed in a heap at the thing's feet. It stood up, moving wrong, joints bending at angles that joints shouldn't bend. Up close, David could see that the royal blue fleece was actually stained with something dark, could see that the pink sneakers were caked with mud and maybe something else. "She tasted like fear," Marcus, not Marcus, said conversationally. "They all do, eventually. But you..." It tilted its head, and David heard something in its neck crack. "You taste like grief, like guilt. So much better, so much richer." David's hand found his pistol, drew it with shaking hands, aimed at center mass the way he'd been trained. "What are you? What do you think I am?" The thing that wore Marcus's face took a step closer. "I'm what lives in the deep places, what grows in the dark, what feeds on what you leave behind when you're too scared to sleep." Another step. "I'm what Marcus became, what Mrs. Hendricks touched, what Mr. Patterson is becoming right now, somewhere in the trees, learning how to wear his own face wrong." "Where's Olivia? Where do you think?" The smile widened, impossibly wide. "She's here. She's always been here. She's everywhere and nowhere. She's feeding me right now, actually. Her fear tastes like cotton candy and screaming." David fired. The gun's report was shockingly loud in the enclosed space of the forest. The bullet hit Marcus, not Marcus, center mass, exactly where David had aimed, exactly where 15 years of quarterly qualifications had trained him to put rounds. The thing didn't even flinch. "Iron and powder," it said. So quaint, so uselessly human. It took another step, close enough now that David could smell that sweet rot smell, could see the wrongness in its eyes. Not just the expression, but the structure. Like something had hollowed out Marcus from the inside and was wearing him like clothes. David fired again. Again. emptying the magazine in a rapid string that echoed off the trees like thunder. The thing stood there, unmarked, smiling. "I've been here since before your species learned to make fire," it said. "I was here when the glaciers carved these valleys. I'll be here when the last human dies and the forest reclaims everything you built. What makes you think your little metal projectiles could hurt me?" It reached out with Marcus's hand, touched David's face with fingers that felt like they were made of wood and cold meat. "But you're different, David. You've touched me before. 3 years ago, when you shot at shadows in the dark, you put your bullet right through Marcus's chest thinking you were protecting him from something following us. You don't remember, do you? How the trauma made you forget? How your mind rewrote the memory so you could keep functioning?" David's vision swam. No, that wasn't, he hadn't. Marcus had been alone when he'd disappeared, had been swept away by something David hadn't seen, something in the darkness. The thing's fingers tightened on his face. "I drank him down while you watched, hollowed him out, wore him like a suit, and you shot him, shot through him trying to kill me. But you can't kill what was never alive." Images flooded David's mind, memories that couldn't be memories because he'd never. But he had. He'd been there, in the northern sector, with Marcus, who'd been acting strange, who'd been hearing voices, who'd turned to David with eyes that weren't his eyes anymore and said, "It's inside me, David. It's eating everything I am." And David had seen something move behind Marcus, something that cast no shadow, something that made his hindbrain scream. He'd drawn his weapon. He'd fired. The bullet had passed through Marcus's chest and into the darkness beyond, and Marcus had looked down at the spreading red stain on his uniform shirt with an expression of terrible relief, and said, "Thank you," before collapsing. But when David had reached him, there'd been no wound, no blood, just Marcus lying there with his eyes open and empty, all the Marcusness gone from behind them. And then Marcus had stood up with his joints bending wrong and smiled with his mouth stretched too wide, and walked backward into the forest, never breaking eye contact until the darkness swallowed him. David had blanked the memory, had let his mind rewrite it into something survivable. Marcus swept away by natural forces, Marcus lost in the woods, Marcus the victim of unfortunate circumstances, and not David's bullet. "There it is," the thing said softly. "The truth, the guilt, the fear, all that delicious emotion, fermented for 3 years. Its tongue, too long, too gray, licked Marcus's lips. "Thank you for coming back, David. Thank you for bringing me so much more to eat." David felt it then, a pulling sensation like something was drawing threads out of his chest. His memories flickered, his daughter's face, his ex-wife's laugh, the day he'd earned his ranger badge, all of it suddenly distant, as if seen through dirty glass. The thing was feeding on him, just like it had fed on Marcus, on Olivia, on Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Hendricks, and probably dozens of others over the years, taking little sips of sanity and memory until they were empty enough to wear. "No," the word came out hoarse. David's hand scrabbled in his pack looking for anything that could help. Rope, useless. Flares, useless. The yellow emergency blanket, wait, the emergency blanket was mylar, reflective, and the thing had said, "I've been here since before your species learned to make fire." Fire, light, reflection. David's fingers closed around the blanket, yanked it free. He shook it open. It rattled like thunder, the mylar surface catching his headlamp and throwing light in a dozen directions. The thing flinched. Just a tiny movement, barely perceptible. But David saw it. Saw the thing that wore Marcus's face recoil from the scattered light. Saw something underneath the surface ripple and twist. He lunged forward, wrapping the blanket around Marcus, not Marcus, like a shroud. The mylar crinkled and snapped, reflecting David's headlamp, the distant moon struggling through the clouds, even the faint phosphorescence of decay on the forest floor. The thing screamed, not with Marcus's voice, with something older, something that sounded like wind through hollow trees and water seeping through rot and roots tearing through stone. It thrashed inside the blanket, and David held on with everything he had, wrapping it tighter, using his body weight to pin it to the ground. The shrieking intensified. David could feel it in his teeth, in his bones, in the soft parts of his brain. His nose started bleeding, his vision blurred, but he held on. The thrashing slowed, weakened. The thing inside the blanket felt less solid now, more like holding smoke or shadow. The smell of rot became overwhelming, then faded to nothing. Then it was gone. David fell backward, gasping. The emergency blanket lay flat on the ground, empty. No Marcus. No thing wearing Marcus. Just the yellow mylar reflecting back David's own terrified face. He lay there for a long moment, listening to the rain, listening to his own ragged breathing, trying to understand what had just happened. Then he heard it. Crying. Real crying, not the mimicked voice of something wearing a girl's face. Coming from upslope, maybe 30 yards away. Hello? His voice came out as a croak. Olivia? Who's there? David pulled himself to his feet, legs shaking, and climbed back up the slope. His headlamp beam swept across the trees until it found her. A girl in a royal blue fleece and pink sneakers huddled in a hollow between two root systems, shivering uncontrollably but alive. Actually, definitely, real. Olivia Martinez? Yes. Oh God, yes. Are you real? I'm real. I'm Ranger David Chen. I'm here to take you home. He wrapped her in his jacket, gave her water and a protein bar, called in their location. She was hypothermic but stable, terrified but uninjured. She babbled about hearing voices, about seeing people who weren't people, about something following her through the forest. David didn't tell her she was right. They found Mr. Patterson the next morning, sitting against a tree 200 yards from the creek junction, unconscious but alive. He had no memory of the previous night, just like Mrs. Hendricks. Both of them recovered fully, physically at least. The search for Marcus Webb was officially closed. The report stated that his remains had likely been scattered by scavengers, a not uncommon fate in the deep forest. David kept working as a ranger for another 8 years before he retired. He never went back to the northern sectors, never worked nights in the Hoh rainforest, and on those occasions when someone went missing in the deep woods, he was always careful, very, very careful, to bring a mylar emergency blanket, just in case. Because he knew the truth now. He knew what lived in the deep places where the green grew thick and the light never reached. He knew it fed on fear and memory and grief. He knew it wore people's faces like masks, and spoke with their voices and hollowed them out from the inside, until nothing remained but hunger. He knew it was still there, waiting, feeding, growing stronger in the dark. I thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you make of David's suppressed memories and the entity's true nature? Did the ambiguity between psychological trauma and genuine supernatural horror work for you? I'd appreciate hearing your interpretation in the comments. The rain had a voice in Olympic National Park, and Mason had spent 5 years trying to forget what it said. He stood at the edge of the Hoh rainforest trailhead, watching water beat on the hood of his ranger vehicle, a 2012 Ford F-250 with 147,000 miles and a persistent check engine light. The November air held that particular Pacific Northwest cold that worked its way through Gore-Tex and wool, settling somewhere beneath the sternum. His Motorola radio crackled with morning chatter, bear sighting near Solduke, weather advisory for elevations above 3,000 feet, routine traffic that felt anything but routine. Mason was 43 years old and looked 50. 5 years ago, he'd been a ranger here, engaged to a woman who taught second grade in Port Angeles, planning a future that involved a mortgage and maybe kids. Then came the Graves incident, the official term for what happened on the Elwha River Trail in October 2009. The unofficial term, the one that appeared in no reports, was psychological break. Mason had found something in those woods, or something had found him. The distinction mattered less than the outcome. 3 months medical leave, a termination dressed up as a resignation, and half a decade working desk jobs in Olympia, watching his savings account dwindle and his engagement implode. Now he was back, not because he wanted to be, but because District Ranger Patricia Oakes had called him 6 days ago with a voice tight as wound wire. "We found something," she'd said, "in Harper's case." Harper Chen, 23 years old when she vanished in August 2009, 2 months before Mason's incident. Art student from Seattle, last seen on the Hoh River Trail photographing moss formations. Her parents had offered a $50,000 reward that still stood, unclaimed, gathering interest in a bank account that had become a shrine to unanswered questions. The case had gone cold the same autumn Mason's life had come apart. Most people assumed the two events were unrelated. Most people were wrong. Mason pulled his pack from the truck bed. A Kelty Redwing 50 containing a Garmin eTrex 20 GPS unit, Silva Ranger compass, first aid kit, emergency bivouac, water filtration system, 550 paracord, and a laminated USGS topographic map of the park's northwest quadrant marked with elevations, water sources, and historical search grid patterns. He also carried something not listed on any equipment manifest, a small mason jar containing what looked like ordinary soil, sealed with red wax. He'd carried it for 5 years, never quite able to throw it away or explain why. Patricia emerged from the ranger station, her Danner Mountain light boots leaving precise prints in the mud. She'd aged well, better than Mason, silver threading through her dark hair in a way that suggested wisdom rather than wear. But her eyes held the same exhaustion Mason saw in his own bathroom mirror. "Didn't think you'd actually come," she said. "Didn't think you'd actually ask." She handed him a manila folder. Inside, 3 Polaroids, slightly overexposed, showing a section of forest floor disturbed in a pattern that would mean nothing to most people. But Mason had been trained in forensic ecology by Dr. Raymond Chen, Harper's father, before grief had transformed him from renowned botanist to obsessive amateur detective. Hiker found these near mile marker 4.7 on the Hoh River Trail, Patricia said. Took them to a shop in Forks for developing. Clerk thought they looked weird, posted them online. Dr. Chen saw them, called me at 2 in the morning. Mason studied the images. The disturbance showed root systems exposed in a configuration that didn't match any natural erosion pattern. More troubling, the moss growth suggested the exposure had occurred years ago, right around August 2009, but the undergrowth pattern indicated the area had been deliberately concealed until recently. "Someone covered this up," Mason said, "then uncovered it, or something," Patricia replied, and the word hung between them like a third person. They both knew what she meant. In 5 years, neither had spoken directly about what Mason claimed to have experienced in 2009. The official narrative held that he'd suffered dehydration and hypoglycemia during a multi-day search operation, leading to hallucinations. The unofficial truth, the one Mason had tried to drown in Olympia dive bars, was far less comfortable. "I need you to survey the area," Patricia continued. "Document everything. GPS coordinates, photographs, soil samples. Dr. Chen is flying up from Berkeley tomorrow. He wants answers." "And if I find something that doesn't fit the narrative?" Patricia's expression flickered, something between hope and dread. "Then we deal with it, together this time." Mason shouldered his pack, feeling the familiar weight settle against his spine. The trailhead beckoned, a tunnel of ancient Sitka spruce and western hemlock disappearing into green darkness. Somewhere in there, Harper Chen had ceased to exist in any official sense. And somewhere in there, Mason had learned that the forest was not empty, even when it appeared to be. He checked his watch. 8:47 a.m. According to the Weather Service, they had maybe 6 hours before the next storm system rolled in from the Pacific. After that, the trail would become a river, and any evidence would wash away into the Sol Duc watershed. "One more thing," Patricia said, lowering her voice. 3 hikers have reported strange experiences on the Hoh River Trail in the past month. Disorientation, time loss. One guy swore he heard his dead sister calling him from off-trail. "What did you tell them?" "That old growth forests can play tricks on perception. Infrasound from wind through hollow trees, carbon dioxide pockets, electromagnetic fields from geological formations." She paused, All the rational explanations we told ourselves 5 years ago. Mason didn't respond. He simply started walking, his boots finding the familiar rhythm of packed earth and exposed roots. The forest swallowed him within 30 feet, the parking lot vanishing as if it had never existed. The Hoh rainforest received an average of 140 inches of precipitation annually, creating an ecosystem so dense with life that death became invisible. Everything that fell was consumed, transformed, integrated. Nurse logs birthed new trees from their rotting hearts. Sword ferns grew in layers 3 deep. The very air tasted green. Mason moved through this abundance with the economy of long practice, his eyes scanning for the subtle markers that indicated human passage. A snapped twig at boot height, compressed moss, the faint chemical scent of synthetic fabrics degrading in humidity. The trail wound along the Hoh River, which ran milk gray with glacial silt even in November, its voice a constant white noise that could mask other sounds. At mile marker 2.3 he paused. His GPS unit showed his exact position, 47. Take to fort again, 123 mine 349 to W, elevation 578 feet. But something felt wrong. The forest had a quality he remembered, a particular density to the silence that occurred when the rain momentarily stopped and nothing moved. It was the sound of held breath. He keyed his radio. Ranger Caldwell to base. Static. He tried again, adjusting frequency. More static, but underneath it, or maybe he imagined it, something that might have been breathing. Mason checked his radio battery. Full. Signal strength should have been adequate this close to the valley floor. He marked the dead zone on his map with a red pencil and continued, noting the anomaly in his field book. 2.3 Mary, comm failure, possible topographic interference. The rational explanation satisfied his training, but not his instinct. By mile marker 4.0, the rain had returned, a soft percussion on his hood that gradually intensified to a roar. The trail became a creek, water sheeting over roots and stones. Mason's waterproof notebook grew soggy despite its protective cover. He was soaked through his base layer, water finding the gaps between jacket and gloves, running down his neck in cold rivulets. And then he saw it, the disturbance from the photographs. It was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 6 feet across, partially hidden beneath a massive Sitka spruce whose roots spread like arthritic fingers. Someone or something had cleared away the accumulated duff and exposed a depression in the soil, roughly oval, deeper at one end. The exposed roots showed cut marks, clean and deliberate, made with a sharp blade. Mason photographed the site from multiple angles using his department-issue Nikon D3100, then took GPS readings and began collecting soil samples in labeled evidence bags. The dirt had a strange texture, almost waxy, and it stuck to his gloves in a way that made his skin crawl beneath the rubber. He was crouched over the third sample when he heard it. A voice, distant and distorted, calling his name. Mason. He froze, his hand halfway to his radio. The voice was female, familiar, coming from somewhere off-trail to the northeast. It sounded like Rachel, his ex-fiancée, but Rachel was in Seattle, remarried, living a life that had no space for broken men who talked about things that couldn't exist. Mason, please. He stood slowly, his legs protesting the sudden movement. Training said to stay on the trail, document the location, radio for support. Instinct said something else, something older than training, a recognition that bypassed rational thought. He'd heard this before. 5 years ago, during the grave search, he'd heard his mother's voice calling from a cedar grove near the Elwha River. His mother, who had died in 2007. He'd followed that voice for 3 hours, spiraling deeper into unmapped terrain, until he'd found something that cost him his career and nearly cost him his sanity. Now, it was happening again. Mason pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on magnetic north. He tapped it, checked for interference from his radio or GPS unit, but the compass continued its useless rotation. He documented this too, though his hands shook slightly as he wrote, 4.7 Mi, magnetic anomaly, auditory phenomenon. The voice came again, Closer now. Mason, I'm so cold. That's when he noticed the moss. On every tree within sight, the moss grew in patterns. Not the random distribution of natural growth, but deliberate arrangements that resembled symbols or letters. He photographed them, zooming in on the largest formation. Shapes that might have been HARPER if you squinted and wanted desperately to see meaning where none existed. Except meaning did exist. Mason felt it the way he felt changes in barometric pressure before storms. He made a decision that violated every protocol he'd ever learned. He left the trail. The forest off trail was a different world. The canopy grew so dense that twilight reigned even at midday. Fallen logs formed barriers 10 feet high, their surfaces slick with decomposition. Mason climbed over them, his pack catching on branches, his breath coming in harsh gasps that echoed wrong in the enclosed space. The voice led him northeast, always just out of sight. Sometimes it sounded like Rachel. Sometimes it sounded like his mother. Once, horrifyingly, it sounded like himself, his own voice calling his name from ahead, as if he'd somehow gotten ahead of himself in time and space. His GPS showed him drifting from the trail at a heading of 045 degrees, elevation gradually increasing. 630 feet, 680 feet, 710 feet. The Garmin's track log would show his path if he ever made it back to explain it. At 760 feet elevation, he found the first cairn. It wasn't a natural formation. Someone had stacked stones in a deliberate pile, about 3 feet high, marking something. Mason circled it, photographing from every angle. The rocks were river stones carried up from the valley floor. Significant effort in this terrain. More troubling, the stones were arranged in a pattern that matched the exposed root system at mile marker 4.7. He found the second cairn 80 yards further on, then a third. They formed a line pointing deeper into the forest, toward a section of the park that appeared on his map as blank space between the Hoh River Trail and the Salduke Valley. The rational part of Mason's mind screamed at him to turn back. The irrational part, the part that had seen things in 2009, knew that turning back wouldn't help. Whatever this was, it had been waiting 5 years for him to return. Harper's disappearance and his own incident were connected, not by coincidence but by design. The fourth cairn stood at the edge of a small clearing, no more than 20 feet across, and in the center of that clearing stood a tree that shouldn't exist. It was a western red cedar, ancient even by old growth standards, easily 800 years old. But every western red cedar in Olympic National Park grew from a base that spread horizontally before rising vertical. This one grew straight from the ground like a pillar, its bark smooth and unbroken for the first 15 feet of trunk. And it was breathing. Mason stood at the clearing's edge, watching the tree's trunk expand and contract in a rhythm that matched human respiration. He counted 16 breaths per minute, the exact rate of a resting adult human. He approached slowly, his camera forgotten in his hand. Up close, the bark showed patterns that resolved into something hideously familiar. The texture of human skin, stretched and darkened and transformed, but unmistakably organic in the wrong way. And in the bark, faces, dozens of them, pressed from inside like hands against frosted glass. One of the faces was Harper Chen's. Mason recognized her from the missing person photos that had papered every ranger station and trailhead in 2009. The same wide-set eyes, the same delicate bone structure. Except her mouth was open in a scream that made no sound, and her eyes tracked his movement with terrible awareness. He stumbled backward, his boot catching on an exposed root. He went down hard, his pack cushioning the fall but knocking the wind from his lungs. When he looked up, the tree had stopped breathing. And it was speaking. Not with a voice, not exactly. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere, a resonance in his bones and teeth, words forming in his skull without passing through his ears. Mason Caldwell. 37 days searching, 93 hours calling, 14 names spoken into dark water. You never stopped feeding me. Mason's hand found the mason jar in his pack, the one he'd carried for 5 years. Inside, Soil from the exact spot where he'd experienced his breakdown in 2009. Soil he'd collected because it had felt wrong, looked wrong, had the waxy texture he'd just sampled at mile marker 4.7. I grew from your grief. I grew from your guilt. Every night you woke wondering if she could have been saved. Every moment you questioned what you saw. Delicious. Sustaining. You are my favorite meal. The faces in the bark were moving now, their mouths opening and closing in unison. Harper's face, and beside it another he didn't recognize. And another. How many hikers had vanished in Olympic National Park over the decades? The official count was 27 unsolved cases since 1980. But how many unofficial disappearances? People who'd never filed a trip plan, never told anyone where they were going, simply failed to return and were never reported? Mason pulled himself to his feet, his mind racing through possibilities. Parasitic entity, psychic vampire. Thought form, given substance through belief. The terminology didn't matter. What mattered was understanding the mechanism. You feed on negative emotions, he said aloud, his voice steady despite the terror crawling up his throat. Grief, fear, doubt. That's why you imitate voices, to draw people off trail, to create confusion and panic. Understanding feeds me too. Your futile attempt at rationalization, so human, so filling. Harper came here to photograph Moss. You called to her. Probably used her mother's voice. Her mother died when she was 15, cancer. I read the case file, she never got over it. Clever but incomplete, I did not call Harper Chen. She came to me willingly. She was searching. They all search, for meaning, for connection, for proof that death is not the end. I provide that proof. Mason's hands shook as he raised his camera, photographing the tree, the faces, the impossible breathing. Evidence that would look like digital manipulation. Evidence that would prove nothing to anyone who hadn't seen it themselves. What did you do to me in 2009? I showed you truth. I let you see, and you fled. But the seed was planted. 5 years of watering it with your sleepless nights. 5 years of fertilizing it with your self-destruction. You broke your own life to deny what you knew. And in that denial, you fed me more richly than any victim who simply disappeared. The tree's breathing intensified. The faces pressed harder against the bark, some beginning to push through. Mason saw fingers emerging impossibly long and thin, like roots seeking purchase in air. He understood then. This entity didn't just consume people. It consumed the energy generated by people trying not to believe in it. Every time someone witnessed something inexplicable and rationalized it away, they fed it. Every night someone woke from nightmares and told themselves it was just stress, just imagination, more food. The entity was parasitic not on belief but on disbelief, on the cognitive dissonance of modern minds encountering the genuinely unexplainable. Mason's breakdown hadn't been a symptom of seeing something impossible. It had been the entity's way of creating a permanent food source. A man who would spend years consuming himself with doubt. The soil samples, Mason said. At mile marker 4.7, you wanted me to find them. You arranged for those photos to reach Dr. Chen. You orchestrated my return. You understand finally, completely. Do you know what happens when understanding becomes perfect? The fingers stretched toward him, dozens of them, reaching from every face in the bark. Harper's fingers. Strangers' fingers. Fingers that belonged to people whose names had been forgotten by everyone except this thing. Perfect understanding means perfect consumption. You will join them. But not as victim. As gardener. You will tend new growth. You will call new voices. You will become part of me while remaining entirely yourself, trapped in the awareness of what you are doing forever. Mason's hand went to his radio, still static. No help coming. He was at 760 feet elevation, 1.2 miles off trail, in a blank space on the map that probably shouldn't be blank. His GPS track log would show his path, but would anyone believe what he'd found at the end of it? The fingers were 6 feet away, 5 feet, Their tips brushed his jacket. He did the only thing he could think of. He opened the mason jar. The soil inside, 5 years old, sealed away from air and light, and the forest that created it, had changed. It had crystallized into something that glittered like obsidian, black and sharp. Mason poured it at the tree's base, watching it spread around the roots. The entity screamed, not with sound but with presence, a pressure wave that knocked leaves from branches and sent small animals fleeing in panic. The fingers retracted, the breathing stopped. The faces in the bark went still, frozen in expressions of hunger and rage. "What have you done?" "I took a sample," Mason said, "from where you tried to consume me in 2009. I sealed it away, separated it from you. 5 years of isolation from its source, it crystallized into something concentrated, something opposite." He was guessing, gambling on intuition and half-formed theories, but the entity's reaction suggested he'd stumbled onto something true. "Poison. You brought me poison. Clever but insufficient. I am vast. I am ancient. I am the fear beneath all fear. The knowledge that consciousness persists beyond death but not as reward, as appetite." "Then I'll bring more poison," Mason said. "I'll document everything, I'll tell everyone. And when they don't believe me, when they rationalize and explain away and convince themselves I'm crazy, I'll collect that disbelief. I'll bottle it. I'll transform doubt into weapon." The logic was absurd, built on metaphor and desperate hope, but the entity recoiled as if struck. "You cannot." "I can. Because you're not supernatural. You're psychological. You're the personification of a cognitive process, the human need to deny what doesn't fit our worldview. You exist in the space between seeing and believing, and that space can be manipulated, controlled, weaponized against you." Mason didn't know if any of this was true, but he spoke with conviction, and conviction had power. He'd learned that in 5 years of self-destruction, belief shaped reality when consciousness was involved, and this entity was nothing if not conscious. The crystallized soil had spread to encircle the tree. The bark began to crack, releasing something that looked like smoke but smelled like relief, the psychic equivalent of released pressure. The faces screamed silently as they dissolved, Harper's expression transforming from agony to something that might have been gratitude. "You have wounded me, but I will heal. I always heal. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering if this was real, or if you finally, completely, went insane." The tree collapsed inward, imploding like a demolished building in reverse. The clearing warped, perspective bending until Mason couldn't tell which direction was out. His compass spun wildly. His GPS showed impossible coordinates, 478604° N, 123.9349 degree W, the exact same position he'd occupied at mile marker 2.3 miles behind him. He ran. Mason emerged onto the Ho River Trail 3 hours later, though his watch showed only 20 minutes had passed. He was covered in dirt, his jacket torn, his field notes scattered across miles of forest. His camera contained 247 photographs, most of them blurred beyond recognition. The few clear images showed ordinary trees, ordinary moss, ordinary forest. Patricia found him at the trailhead, sitting in his truck with the heater running. She took one look at his face and said nothing, just handed him a thermos of coffee that he couldn't taste. "Did you find anything?" she finally asked. Mason stared at his hands. The waxy residue from the soil samples was gone. His GPS track log showed a straight line from trailhead to mile marker 4, 7 and back. No detour, no elevation gain, no blank spaces explored. "Nothing conclusive," he said. It was the truth and a lie simultaneously. He'd found everything. He'd found nothing that could be proven. Patricia nodded slowly. "Dr. Chen is arriving tomorrow. Should I tell him anything?" Mason thought about Harper's face in the bark, the momentary gratitude before dissolution. Had he freed her? Or had he simply disrupted the entity's current manifestation, forcing it to retreat and regroup? The entity's final words suggested the latter. "Tell him his daughter died quickly," Mason said. "Tell him it wasn't his fault. Tell him to stop looking." "And what will you tell yourself?" Mason didn't answer. He'd spend the rest of his life telling himself different versions of what happened. Some nights he'd believe it was real. Some nights he'd believe he was crazy. The entity had guaranteed that ambiguity. It was still feeding, even in defeat. He drove away from Olympic National Park as the next storm system rolled in from the Pacific. In his rearview mirror, the forest looked ordinary, just trees and moss and rain, the way forests should look. But he knew what waited in the blank spaces between trails. He knew what grew when people fed it with their doubt, and he knew he'd be back, not to fight it, not to destroy it, but to document it, to collect samples, to build a case file that might save the next person who heard voices calling from the green darkness, even if that documentation drove him further into isolation, even if no one believed him, because the alternative was letting it feed unopposed, and Mason had spent 5 years feeding it unintentionally. It was time to stop. He drove through Forks, past Port Angeles, onto Highway 101 heading east. Behind him, Olympic National Park receded into rain and mist. Ahead, uncertain. But for the first time in 5 years, Mason felt something other than doubt. He felt purpose. Even if that purpose was built on a foundation of uncertainty. Even if he'd never know for sure whether the breathing tree was real or if he'd finally broken completely. In the end, the entity had been right about one thing. Perfect understanding led to perfect consumption. But the entity had made one mistake. It had assumed Mason wanted perfect understanding. He didn't. He wanted the fight. He wanted the search. He wanted the endless, maddening work of collecting evidence that would never quite prove anything. Because as long as he was searching, he was still human. As long as he doubted, he was still free. And as long as he fed on his own uncertainty instead of letting it feed on him, he could survive. 3 months later, Mason received a package at his Olympia apartment. No return address. Inside, a photograph he didn't remember taking showing the breathing tree in perfect clarity. And in the lower right corner, scratched into the bark, coordinates: 478604 degree N, 123.9349 dig W, the exact position where everything had started, where everything continued. Mason pinned the photograph to his wall, next to a map of Olympic National Park, marked with 27 unsolved disappearances. He drew lines connecting them, searching for patterns. He wouldn't find certainty, he wouldn't find proof, but he'd find something. Eventually. In the blank spaces where maps failed and compasses spun and voices called from the green darkness, he'd find what waited there, or it would find him. The distinction mattered less than the search. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's your interpretation of what Mason truly encountered in the forest? Psychological breakdown or genuine supernatural entity? The ambiguity is intentional, but I'm curious which side of the uncertainty resonates with you. Share your theories in the comments.